Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. I'm Samantha and this is Trans IRL. Tonight we've got a great show for you and a guest I've wanted to speak with for quite some time. For those watching live on Twitch, Facebook, and YouTube, we'll be getting to as many of your questions as possible within the hour here. As always, my wonderful producer Stephen will be monitoring and supporting the chats, so we hope to hear from as many of you as possible. So let's get on with tonight's show. Our guest is a world record holding powerlifter and bodybuilder. Her story made headlines when portions of her journey were captured in the documentary Transformer, which can be found on Netflix. In it, she shares parts of her journey in exploring gender identity and presentation and provides an honest look at how transitioning affects our family, friends, and self. Tonight, I'll be speaking with her about her life since the documentary and dive into more of her story. So with that, I'd like to welcome Janae Kroc to the show. Janae, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
This is such an honor. It really is. Ever since I first saw the trailer from your documentary, I knew I absolutely want to talk to you. I would love to talk to you. So thank you for making time in your busy schedule to join me here and answer a few questions, not only my own, but from our viewers.
All
All
right. Sounds
right.
great. Can't. Okay.
Well, to start off, I'd like to give you a few minutes just to share a little bit about your story, your background, and your journey in discovering yourself.
Yeah. So I knew at a very young age, like a lot of trans people. I mean, some of us, we don't figure it out till later, but I knew by the time I was 5 or 6 years old. I just found myself constantly daydreaming about being female. And then, but I also recognized by that age that it was something that it wasn't okay to share, that if I told people it wasn't going to be received well. So I just tried to bury it down. And I was really into sports and lifting from a very young age as well. And so I was able to hide in that world. And everyone just assumed that I was this, super masculine little boy. And then as I got older, I was seen as really this total alpha male type. I played sports year round, baseball, football, and wrestling, and then I was obsessed with lifting. And from a very young age, by the time I was in high school, I started competing in powerlifting and continued that through the Marines. And eventually, I competed as a professional for over a decade and eventually broke the all-time world record in my weight class, won a world championship, became a sponsored athlete. But the whole time I was hiding all these feelings and hiding this part of my identity. And the same thing when I went through the Marine Corps right after high school. I ended up getting selected for presidential security and worked at Camp David under President Clinton. And the entire time I was bearing all these feelings down, and I was just terrified that someone would find out, and that I would be exposed, and I was terrified of the reactions of everyone, like a lot of us. I was afraid that I would lose all my friends, my family, that I would be completely rejected. And as I achieved more success in the lifting world, it became harder and harder because I felt like people had put me up on a pedestal, and that if I came out, I was going to be letting everyone down. And I was this small town kid who came from this rural little, grew up in this trailer out in the woods, and had become somewhat of like a small town local hero of sorts. And so that I felt even more pressured to stay in the closet and not come out. And I was married at the time, and I had 3 young boys. Fortunately, I told them everything when they were very young. And but by the time I reached my early 30s, I just couldn't do it anymore. And it was just tearing me apart from the inside. At one point, I was suicidal, and I just realized, I can't do this, and I've got to start dealing with this. And started coming out to family and friends, and it went better than expected. And then I was actually outed publicly, and that turned my life upside down for a while. And but it was actually, there was this silver lining in those clouds. And I had wanted to get into activism and speaking and educating for a while. So that basically opened that door and allowed me to start doing all that stuff. And even while I lost things, I lost employment. Some of my sponsors dropped me from the lifting world, and it was pretty crazy for a while. But in the end, things have, like I said, it was a silver lining. Things have turned out really well. I was able to get into activism and educating, and that's what I'm doing right now. And life is great.
Well, you touched on a lot of really important topics there. We both grew up around the same time frame here in the U.S., and um, your story resonates with me quite a bit as somebody who, from a very young age, knew what they were experiencing, but didn't really have the language to talk through it. And at the same time, wasn't in an environment where it felt like that was ever going to be a feasible option. And I think for a lot of us in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and definitely before, there was not any positive role models or positive information at all about the feelings that we were experiencing.
hmm Yeah, and there was no social media then. I mean, there was no internet. I didn't know that anyone else in the world felt the way I did. I just thought I didn't know what was wrong with me, but I felt like I was broken. There was something wrong. And the first time I'd heard of another trans person, I don't know if you're familiar with Carolyn Kasi, but
Absolutely.
she would, yeah, yeah. So she was a professional model for the people that aren't familiar with her. And she was outed after she appeared in one of the James Bond movies. And after that, and it really turned her life upside down and caused her a lot of turmoil. But she ended up writing a couple books, and she started going on TV and doing all these interviews. And I happened to be homesick from school one day, and this is like in the early 1980s. And it was the Phil Donahue show, and she came on, and I was captivated. And the thing was, I was still totally in denial, and I would be for a long time. I mean, I was in denial about being trans. Oh my gosh, almost probably until I came out. I just, the thing is, I clung to the fact that because I was into sports and that I was into lifting and liked being big and strong, and then I was attracted to women, I convinced myself that I was, quote unquote, normal and that I wasn't trans because every trans girl I'd ever heard of was stereotypically feminine. Most of them were attracted to men. So I was able to, compartmentalize that and say, well, I'm not like them. There's something there, but I'm not trans. But anyway, Carolyn was the first one I ever heard of, and I was just really impressed with her. The way she handled the really rude questions, she was very composed and very well spoken. But I was just, I mean, I was floored, and I was glued to the TV. And even then, I remember being terrified of if my mom or dad walked into the room and wondered, why are you watching that? Like I always felt like I was. I don't know if you felt this way, but I always felt like I was the
Oh, yeah,
littlest thing was going to expose me. Yeah, and I was
definitely. It
this
always
like
felt like, anything could break the facade, right?
yeah, exactly. Like the littlest thing. And, like, I mean, no one would think anything of that, but I was, terrified, like, oh my God, they're going to know. They're going to know. And even though I was still in denial, I was constantly afraid that someone was going to find out. And one time in, one time in high school, my brother actually caught me wearing a pair of my mom's heels. But he didn't, and we talked to, he didn't never said a word. I was terrified. We had one bathroom and the door didn't lock very well, and sometimes just messing with each other, we'd push the door in when somebody was in there, and my brother did that to me, and I was standing there in my mom's heels, and I lunged for the door and hurry up and closed it, and I was just terrified. My heart was beating like 1,000 beats a minute, and I was
I'm
waiting for
getting
him to
stretched
like
just
tease
hearing the
me or
story.
yeah. And I was waiting for him to start teasing me and bring it up later, and he never did. And then I talked to him about it later when we were adults, long after I was out, and he's like, "What? I never noticed." He had no idea, and I was terrified for so long, and he never even noticed. But
And
yeah, it
see,
was
that's
just
that's a
any
funny
little
thing you bring up,
thing.
though, because for people who aren't feeling this way and aren't experiencing this, they don't go around thinking about this at all. When I finally came out,
Mhm.
everyone was shocked. The only person who had
Yeah.
any inkling that I might be coming out was the one trans individual I knew in my life before I came out. Other than that, people don't question gender when they're just looking at people. That is definitely something that I think we develop as a coping mechanism, or at least a mechanism to help protect us as we're trying to deal with these feelings in
Yeah.
secret.
Mhm. Yeah, in some ways, I think it's almost a means of survival, right? Like it was just, I mean, I was hyper aware of gender in everything. But that constant fear of exposure, like I couldn't walk through a department store. Like I desperately wanted to go into the women's section and look at the makeup and the purses and shoes and all that stuff. And I knew I couldn't. So just like going anywhere near there just filled me with anxiety, made me really nervous. And it was these mixed feelings of, really being curious and wanting to explore that stuff and being very drawn to it, but at the same time this fear of being found out, and then all these feelings of guilt and shame because I didn't understand why I felt that way, and I felt like there was something wrong with me. And then just the way I was brought up, when we were brought up like old school Catholic, so there was a lot of guilt and shame attached to that. And I not only did I think what I was, how I was weird, but that there, but it was evil or sinful somehow. And so yeah, I was just carrying all this stuff around, as I'm sure you probably did the same thing or something similar, and as so many trans individuals do. And but yeah, there was no information back then whatsoever. I remember my first day in college, I went to the library and checked out every book they had. And it was actually very limited, and it was all written by people outside the community. It was all very academic, and it was all very inaccurate. Looking back, it was just not good information. And so that's one way today, at least we've moved a long ways forward with all of that. There's so much more information, and there's, people like you doing important shows like this, and, getting that information out there and helping people understand that we're people just like everybody else. So I think that's so important.
Well, thank you. I did want to talk a little bit about your time in the Marines and that experience. So you were actually on presidential duty, you said?
Yeah, so it was actually it was a program that you were selected for. Like, you couldn't pick to be in that. But so when you go to boot camp, what they do, I'll try to give you a quick overview of the whole thing, is anyone who scored high on the ASVAB test, they put us through another series of testing, and we were called special screeners. And then the people who scored high on those tests were brought back, and then you qualified for these special fields, things like counterintelligence, like linguists, and different fields like that. And one of the fields was presidential security. And then they had us, we went through another interview, went through more interviews, and then they told us to select our top three choices, and they talked about why we would be interested in those. And then we were subjected to more testing and interviews, and there was all this psychological testing. It was a long process. And at one point I was almost dropped from the program, not because there was anything I did wrong, but because I missed several interviews. My troop leaders, when I was in infantry school, were actually jealous that I was getting put into the program. And the environment there was still very much like boot camp. We had no say over what we did or where we went. Everything was, we were just following orders. Well, this FBI agent was flying out to California to interview me, and they just didn't tell me that he was even there. They didn't let me go to the interviews. So he came out for his third time, and we had just gotten out of the field, and we were cleaning weapons. And they were like, "Hey, you have an interview over at headquarters and you're late." So I go running over there, and I'm running up the stairs, and I pass this guy in a suit, and I had no idea who I was even meeting. They told me it was, to ask for some master sergeant. So I get there, I get to the desk, and this lance corporal is like, "Oh yeah, you were here to meet with agent so and so. He just left. Well, we'll just reschedule that for another time." And then he's like, "Well, hang on, let me see if I can catch him." So he ran outside, caught this guy getting in his car. He comes back. The agent was furious, and he's like, "Why haven't you showed up for any of your meetings?" He's like, "This was my last trip out here. I was going to drop you from the program if you didn't show today." And so I dropped dime on everybody. I told them who my platoon sergeants were, my officer, the in charge, and everybody. And I was like, "Look, you have to understand, this is like a boot camp type environment." I had no idea there were any meetings. And so he said he would make sure it never happened again. But yeah, I was that close to being dropped from the program, didn't even know it. But anyway, so basically
Well,
after
how
that,
scary
we'd go
was
through all
it
our schools.
to you're obviously you're dealing with these internal feelings, you're going through all these interviews, you're talking to the FBI. Like, how anxiety inducing was it to go through that thinking they might find something out?
Well, that's the thing. So the psychological testing. So we had these huge, like 600 question tests. And right away, one of the questions is, "Did you ever wish you were a girl?" And I was like, I was like, "Oh no!" I was like, "Nope." and uh, and then I was like, "Oh my gosh, why are they asking that?" And I was so terrified that they were going to figure out, and then I'd be exposed, I'd be in a bunch of trouble, and I'd get kicked out and everything. But that never
Oh my
came up.
gosh.
But yeah, it was a long process. I ended up making it through the program, and I spent 2 years in Washington D.C. doing security for admirals and generals that worked at the Pentagon, and some of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We used to guard their homes, and at the Washington Navy Yard and at the 8th and I Barracks in Southeast D.C. And then I spent 2 years up at the presidential retreat at Camp David, and under President Clinton. So it sounds really cool to talk about it, but I mean, honestly, it was, I was still in the Marines, and we still operated the same way. It was, and I feel very fortunate that I was able to do that duty. But to be honest, it sounds way cooler than, security. If you do security right, it's very boring. So nothing happens. But
True.
it was a fun experience, and I'm glad I got to experience that.
Yeah, definitely. So coming out of the Marines, you really started working your powerlifting and bodybuilding career. And I know for me, whenever I was feeling extremely dysphoric or really down on my appearance or anything like that, I could distract myself with hobbies or busy work or anything, right? The more distracted I was, the less I had to think about the pain I was feeling inside. And I'm curious if powerlifting kind of served a similar purpose for you.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, honestly, there was a lot to unpack when I finally started dealing with all my feelings. And the therapist I was seeing at the time, and most people had, suggested that the powerlifting was purely compensation for, who I really was, and it was a way to hide. And in some ways, it did serve that. But in a lot of ways, it was just something I was very passionate about. And
Hmm.
and it was something I loved doing, but it also brought a lot of mixed feelings, right? So I was getting bigger and stronger, and I loved competing, and I was getting slowly getting better and better at it, and I had bigger aspirations from the beginning. From for a long time I wanted to be a world champion. I wanted to be number one in the world, and it took me almost 20 years to get there, but it was something I really enjoyed and I was passionate about. But at the same time, the bigger I got and the more muscular I got, I had a lot of conflicting feelings. And especially after when I really started dealing with everything, there was this constant pull back and forth. And I thought the only way I could ever transition, or the only way I could be out, would to be to conform to these, especially for a lot of girls, unrealistic body standards. I thought I was going to have to drop like 150 pounds and, be the skinny little thing. And I was going to have to be stereotypically feminine in every single way. And that was really distressing for me. And actually, after I got outed, and I started to, I'd already been taking some small steps, but then kind of dove more into transition. I dropped 72 pounds, and I lost 40 of it over a 4 month period. And, and then after losing like 72 pounds, and my lifting, I was still training, but I was like switching the focus of my exercising. But I started getting very frustrated. I had worked so hard all these years to, achieve all of this, and I enjoyed it very much. And then like feeling like I was having to give it all up, it really bothered me. And then I was like, well, what does this mean? Am I not really trans? Like, why is it bothering me so much? And so that was a lot to sit down and figure out. And it really wasn't until I started getting closer to the women in the strength sports. Like I knew a lot of women because, I was competing professionally. I would see a lot of these same girls at the competitions. They were always in different divisions, but I knew them, but I wasn't really close to any of them. But when I came out, a lot of them reached out to me, which I was very thankful for. I didn't know how they were going to receive me. I actually was expecting more of them to reject me and feel like I was like an imposter, I was intruding on their territory, but it was exactly the opposite. They really welcomed me with open arms, and it was so nice. And actually talking with them is what really made me understand that that you could be a woman and love being strong and love being muscular and doing all these things that has nothing to do with gender. But in talking with these women and realizing they struggled with the exact same things I struggled with, like wanting to be bigger and muscular, but all this pressure from society, all this pressure from our family, our friends, and oh, don't get too big, don't, that's not feminine, and all these things. But like listening to them was like, oh my God, this is what I've been dealing with all this time, and now it all makes so much more sense, and it really, really helped me.
I love that. I love that you had that support within the weightlifting, powerlifting community there, especially from other female competitors. And I think that's important. A lot of us are worried in transition we're going to lose important things that we had in our lives. And I think it's great how you've worked through it. And of course, if you haven't seen the documentary yet on Netflix, for people who are watching out there, I think Transformer really shows that back and forth in your life, right? As you really struggle through some of those feelings. But you're absolutely right that you can be who you are, and your size doesn't define your identity. You can be strong and you can be feminine, and that's okay. We're all different in how we present and what we need for ourselves. And I think it is hard at times to, find that self acceptance, but um, we don't have to give up as much, I think, as we think we have to give up a lot of times in transition.
Yeah, I think it's important that we have to be careful sometimes to not fall into the same trap that a lot of other women do, trying to conform to these standards that are unrealistic, or or these messages that tell us all that there's only one type of woman that's acceptable, that you have to look a certain way or be a certain way. And that in this heteronormative and, cisgendered society, it's just they have these roles that are strictly defined. And not only are they really harmful for us, but they're harmful to all women in general. And there's just, in that, like I said, when I got close to the women in the strength sport, that was like a huge light bulb moment for me and really helped so much.
Very cool. Something I find really endearing about your story, because it's something I personally relate to, is your relationship with your kids. You have three sons, and I have four sons. And I know that a big worry I had coming out early on was how my kids were going to respond. How did your kids react to them when you first came out?
Fortunately, I told them when they were very young. It was towards the end of my marriage to their mother. And I had told her I told her before we even started dating. And we can talk about that after I answer this question. But she was, at this point, she was not supportive at all. She didn't want anyone to know. She didn't want me to, the farthest she came was, do what you have to do. I don't want to see it. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want the boys to be exposed to it. And basically it can be like your little secret, which of course made me feel even worse. And like I was hiding something I should be ashamed of. But I told her that I thought it was very important for the boys to know. I didn't want to be dishonest with them. And if there's nothing to be ashamed about, why would I want to hide it? And she was still against it, but I told her, I said, look, I'm going to have the conversation with them. They were 2, 4, and 6. And I just said, I think it's very important and I believe in honesty. And so I told them, and it's actually kind of a funny little story. So they were, like I said, they were 2, 4, and 6, so they're pretty young. And fortunately, they hadn't really learned any bias or prejudice yet that way. And so I kind of called them into my bedroom and explained, like, hey, this is in a very age appropriate, very basic terms. This is what's going on. This is who I am. And I said, I'm going to change my clothes. I'm going to put on some makeup and I wear a wig. I'm going to put that on. And then we're going to do all the stuff we normally do today, but I'm just going to get changed first. And they said, okay, just kind of shrug their shoulders. And, like little boys, 2, 4, and 6, they're running in and out, they're super loud, playing everywhere. And so I get all done and I call them all back in the room. And my oldest walks in, he looks at me and he's like, wow, you look like a girl, a really, really big girl. And then we all kind of busted out laughing. And that was just that. And they've just known their whole lives. It's never been something that like I hid from them. It's something, if they had questions, I answered them. And they just grew up knowing that was part of me. And even though like I wasn't out publicly, and we talked a lot about that too growing up, um, what happened if I got outed and how people might react and how we should handle that and all those kind of things. So it was always something kind of looming in the background. But I mean, honestly, I'm so fortunate. Like they couldn't be any better about it. For anyone who's seen the documentary, you can see like the bond I have with them and how supportive they are. And it's been really awesome. And it's made everything, so much easier on me because a lot of trans people, especially trans women with sons, can often have a very difficult time and with their kids understanding. And I've been really fortunate that they're like my biggest supporters.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. My oldest kids were 2, 4, and 6 when I told them. I just had a baby at the time too. But I have to say, seeing your kids grown up, or at least in their late teens now in the documentary, was just, for me, that was important. For me, that was important to see um, you with your boys and just having a blast with them, doing the things you normally do with your kids, and just seeing that love and that connection there. And I know, for me as a trans parent with younger kids, it's like this is what I needed to see. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for sharing your story with the boys in the documentary as well. I think that's so important. And you absolutely touched on a really important thing I wanted to talk about too, which was that hate and intolerance is a learned behavior.
Mm-hmm.
My guys were little, and my experience was very similar to yours in that I explained at a very age appropriate level what's happening, and they said, "Okay, let's go play Legos." It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have to be um, it doesn't have to be the end of a relationship or a strain on families. Kids are pretty happy to just be loved by their parents, and I think first and foremost, as long as I'm able to provide that, they're happy.
Exactly. And Like, yeah, and like he just said and reiterated that, prejudice is learned, and they hadn't learned that yet. And so for them, it was just one of the other ways that I'm different from other people, just like I was the big, strong power lifter, and, they didn't know any other dads that were, world champion lifters or whatever. So it was just one other way that I was different. And the thing is, and one thing I thought was really important too, that I tried to make sure I did, or I guess you could say never did, was show any shame or embarrassment about it. Like I did not want to send that message that there's something wrong or this is something I should be ashamed of. Even though, to be honest, I struggled with those feelings a lot myself, I didn't want to send that message to them. I didn't want them to think that, trans people or anyone that's different in any way is something that you should be ashamed of or judge people for. So when I explained it to them, and whenever we talked about it, or whenever I was presenting this way, I never acted like it was, like something I was ashamed of or something I needed to hide or be embarrassed. And I didn't apologize for being this way, because I think sometimes people feel like they feel necessary to say, well, I'm sorry. Well, you don't need to apologize for who you are. And even though people mean well, in doing that, you're telling them there's something to be sorry for. So I think that's something important to keep in mind. And just, hey, this is who we are. There's nothing wrong with that. It's fine to be proud of who we are. We all should be. And I wanted to convey that message to them. And I think that also helps with acceptance and stuff. And the same thing with me coming out. When I started coming out to everyone, it was super, super difficult, like it is for all of us initially. But I was very honest and open, and I tried not to be defensive about anything. And I was like, hey, this is who I am. This is what it is, and it's me, and that's just how things are. And I really tried to own it, and I think that really helped with other people being able to accept me.
Oh, absolutely. When we have that um, confidence in ourselves, that goes a long way in helping other people along if they're struggling with the idea.
Yeah, I noticed that really early on when I first started going out in public. Like my initial times out, and my makeup and fashion skills back then were not proficient whatsoever. And I'm sure I was a sight to behold. But and at that time I was like 270 pounds of muscle, and I remember like my first like trip out into the quote unquote normal world was a Meyer, to get groceries at Meyer on like a Saturday afternoon when the store was packed. Why I chose that time, I have no idea. But I've competed in front of thousands of people. I've spoke to large audiences, and none of that made me nervous at all. But I was terrified getting out of my car that day. I remember like literally shaking, and I was like, "But I need to do this. I need to do this." And I went in and did my grocery shopping, but I realized early on that when I was feeling insecure and I was nervous, it definitely other people reacted much worse because it made them feel awkward. If I was feeling awkward, it added a lot of tension and anxiety to the whole situation. And I realized once I relaxed, and if I was just confident in who I was and I felt like I was owning it, and especially like the days that I was feeling pretty or I was feeling good about myself, I noticed a clear difference in how people reacted to me, and recognized that right away. So then I tried to just really own that. And I'm not going to lie, I wasn't able to do that every day. And I had my times, and I still do from time to time. I still, sometimes I look in the mirror, and it's still hard to, love what I see. But when you can really own it, and you don't, you show you're comfortable with who you are, other people definitely, notice that and just naturally react much better. And they're just like, okay, that's how this, I mean, now, no matter how, I mean, my presentation varies a lot from kind of like this gender queer look to extremely feminine to quite masculine sometimes with a little bit of, I'm always, no matter what, I mean, you can definitely tell I mean, my nails are always painted. I always carry a purse. And, vast majority of my clothes are all female clothes. So even when I'm not wearing makeup or don't have my wigs on, I'm not someone, I don't look stereotypically masculine anymore. But no matter what it is, I just, I really try to own it. If I see a cute top, and no matter how I'm dressed or something I want, I go in and I'll try it on, and no matter what I'm wearing. And the thing is, the funny thing is, before, I remember having my toenails painted and just like going out in public and being like, oh my God, like, this is so, what are people going to say? What are they going to think? And
Right.
now, like, I totally don't care. And it makes such a huge difference in how everyone else reacts.
Those early transition jitters are so real. I can remember being
Mhm.
like in the car, like just gripping the steering wheel, afraid to go in for shopping early in my transition. every time you go out as yourself, it gets easier, it gets easier, it gets easier. But those early days, gosh, I'm glad I don't have to go through those anymore.
Yeah, like I said, I've never been so nervous or so scared in my life, and it was just, it was a fear of, we're already struggling to accept ourselves and feel good about who we are, and then, having people react really negatively or say nasty things, and I just, I think we all had like visions of these horrible things that might happen, and I was pretty fortunate. I was never attacked by anybody, although I did have one incident that was close. I had five guys follow me into a parking garage late at night, but I always had envisioned in my head like a group of high school kids, like all yelling just terrible things and drawing lots of attention. And that never happened. I mean, there were lots of snickers and snide comments as I'd walk by and things like that early on, especially. And even now it happens once in a while just because of my size, I stick out and but yeah, it was tough, and it was tough to feel good about who you are when, when you have those kind of reactions. And this is, and it was at a really interesting period of my life because, and I feel very fortunate to have this experience because, so at this time, this is when I was basically at the peak of my powerlifting career. And I was also working full time as a pharmacist. So I almost had like three different lives going on. I would go to, my sponsors would send me out to some expo or whatever, and I'd literally be sitting in a booth signing autographs and taking photos with fans all day. So like in that world, I was very well known, and literally if I tried to go to the bathroom, it would take me forever because I would get stopped every 10 feet for pictures or autographs or whatever. So like in brief, like these little short bursts, I'm playing like superstar, like almost like being famous. And then, then during the week, I'm going back and doing my pharmacy job, and I'm just, another pharmacist, although a very big one, but just an average middle class life. But then I'm just starting to venture out in public as, not passing trans person, and I'm getting treated less than human. So it's like at one instance, it's like, like I said, people are waiting in line to take a photo with me. And then a few days later, I'm being treated like, like lower than low. And so it was very interesting, and it was very humbling and also very educational. And it taught me a lot and showed me so many different perspectives. And I'm thankful for having gone through all of that. But at the same time, it was very difficult, and it was just, it was hard to have good confidence and good self-esteem. And people at the time would have probably found that really hard to believe, someone who's on the cover of magazines and doing all these things, but yet just feeling inside, like feeling really horrible about who I was, and feeling like I was living this lie, even though at that point I was out to my family and my friends, I still wasn't, totally out. And so I was still hiding all this stuff, and that, and just having to hide everything attached a certain level of shame to it. So it was a really interesting period in my life that I'm very thankful for, but it was also very difficult at times too.
One of the things I really like about the documentary is that you came back to this dichotomy, the back and forth between your previous life and that world and life as Janae. I thought it was really eye-opening, and I thought it was such an important conversation to have because just in general, the binary kind of trans stories seem like those are the ones that get the most attention, right? The Caroline Cosies or
Mm-hmm.
Candace Canes, where it's just very clear from one side to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
But you spent and you worked so long in between both of those sides, and a lot of people do. A lot of people do spend time in the middle there and really try to figure out, where are they most comfortable. So, coming off the documentary, I'm wondering, where do you stand on that today, and how do you define your gender identity?
Yeah, that's a great question, and to be honest, I've always been. The thing is with the dichotomy, like I felt because of how our society is, right? Like it's very binary, and it's very like we're taught that it's very masculine or you're very feminine, and there's no mixing the two. And that if you're trans and you're going to transition, well, these are all the rules you have to adhere to. So now the way I identify is, and some people have a problem with this, but I identify as transgender, non-binary, and gender fluid. And the reason I do is because I feel like that most accurately describes me. And I'm not a big fan of labels because when we label ourselves, people are automatically going to apply whatever they know about that label to us, whether or not it actually applies. So once you say you're trans, that person's right in their brain. They're going to go, okay, trans, what do I know about trans? And they're going to apply that to us. And it may be totally inaccurate. It may be totally different than our own experience. But but I identify as trans because I definitely have a strong cross gender identity. I have a female gender identity and always have had. And so, but then I also identify as non-binary because I'm very blurry with my gender. Like I don't fit neatly in a box. And then I identify as gender fluid because there is some variation. And sometimes I am more masculine, sometimes I'm more feminine. Even though my identity never changes, my presentation or maybe how I carry myself that day does. So there's times where I am as feminine as anyone you'll ever meet, and there's some days where I'm quite masculine in behavior or what people would define as masculine. So I'm just blurry in a lot of ways. I don't, as much as people would like, I don't fit neatly in a box, and I've learned to accept that because when like what you see in the documentary, I was still struggling to find a box that I fit in, or which, or more aptly, which box that I fit in better. Like I felt like I had to pick a side. Well, if I'm going to transition, then I've got to be, more feminine in all these ways. And if I'm not going to, then these are the things I have to do. So I felt like it was an either or decision. And until I realized, like, no, that's not. As humans, we're incredibly complex, and no one is, just fits neatly, perfectly anywhere. And but for me, I'm very blurry and very messy, and that's okay. I learned to embrace that, and I'm fine with being, big and muscular. Like now, I have no desire to be this tiny little thing. And granted, I'm not going to say that I don't struggle with that at times, because there are days where I would like to look more stereotypically feminine. There's still a few areas I'm working on. Like I'm not really comfortable in a bikini and things like that because of how my body is. So that's something I still struggle with. But most days I feel really, really good about it, and I'm okay not blending in and realizing that there's nothing wrong with that. Just because someone fits a stereotype or is more accepted in society doesn't mean one person is more valid or more valuable than another person. And it's okay, and I'm okay being that person that doesn't fit in, and that's just me. And I hope that other people, and the thing is, I think we're all different in some way. It may not be their gender, it may not be sexuality, it may be something totally unrelated, but so many of us hide a part of who we are because we're afraid of rejection, we're afraid of being judged. And so I think, like, I like to say that normal is the part of ourselves that we're comfortable sharing with the world, that it's really an illusion, and we all have little bits of ourselves that we hide because we're afraid of what other people are going to think about that. And I hope that anyone watching this or anyone who follows my story will, be able to gain inspiration to be themselves in whatever way that is, just by the things I do.
No, I think that's stated beautifully. And honestly, that type of non-binary or gender fluid visibility is so essential, not only for other people who are in the same boat as you, but also for allies and people who need to understand that it's not always black and white. And
Mm-hmm.
your visibility, I think, is just huge. It's so important to have that conversation, and it's raw. Your emotions are very raw in the documentary, and I think it's just really beautiful how open you are in talking through that. And I know a lot of people are going to get a lot out of that. I know I got a lot out of it. As somebody who presents more binary, it helps my understanding and what other people are going through on this journey as well. So, really, really incredible share there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, I do want to go back to powerlifting for a while, for a
Okay.
second here. I'm wondering, going forward in the future here, what does your involvement with powerlifting look like in the future? Do you ever see yourself competing or supporting the sport?
I'm definitely supporting the sport for sure. Probably not competing. I'll
Yeah.
explain why in a second here. But no, I still coach some athletes. I still help people out. I still go to competitions. I still meet up with a lot of my friends from that world to train every now and then, which is something, I'll be honest, is something I struggle with because yeah, when I left the sport, when I left powerlifting, I was on the top, and my performance now, especially after starting estrogen and having lost weight, is nowhere near what it used to be. And so it's frustrating for me at times, like for any athlete, especially any athlete that competes at a high level. And when you're that type of athlete, someday you're going to hit your peak, and that's going to be the best you ever do. But we never think we've hit that peak. We always think there's going to be more, and you're going to keep going. And then, and I'm at the point in my career now where I've realized my best days are behind me, and that's hard to accept, and it's hard to deal with. And especially with my transition, sacrificing some of that and focusing on different things has been very difficult for me. And it just, yeah, so I'll always be involved with the sport. I'm thinking about hosting some competitions once hopefully we get there where we can do these things again. But like hosting competitions, helping other athletes, coaching, I've been doing a lot more of that. I will always train. I love to train. I still train. I actually do a lot more mountain biking now, and I'm focusing more on being a well-rounded athlete and less of like a strength specialist. But to be honest, I still miss competition. I miss competing. I was someone who thrived on that. And for me, that was like the biggest high in the world. Like winning was just everything. And so I do miss that. It does, it is hard at times. But for people that are wondering, the reason I've chosen not to compete now or not to compete as a woman is because a couple reasons. But one, I don't want to do anything that would harm trans athletes or harm the sport. And there's a lot of controversy with trans athletes. I've spoke about this and I plan to speak out about this a lot more. But there's I didn't want I feel if I competed, the thing was I was number one in the world as a male. So if I came over and competed in the female side, why you would expect that I would have a similar level of success. Well, if I do that, and let's say I do break some world records or I was to win world championships, there's going to be a huge outcry, and me looking the way I look, I would be the perfect example for everyone that is against trans athletes to throw my pictures up everywhere and say, see, this is why trans women shouldn't be able to compete. This is why it's unfair. And whether that's true or not is one thing, but the thing is, I don't want to be someone that makes an easy target for the people that are against trans athletes and for them to be able to use that to harm other athletes and prevent them from competing. So that's one of my biggest concerns. And the other thing is, and the reason why I still maintain as much muscle as I do. I've been on estrogen for a long time, but I've also used low doses of androgens to help balance everything out for me and to allow me to keep some of my muscle and to keep my body fat really low. If I wasn't doing those things, I would lose a lot more strength and gain more body fat than I already have, even though I'm nowhere near as strong or big as I used to be. If I was solely on estrogen, my performance would decrease a fair amount more. So that's another thing too. Like as long as I'm doing that, even though they're just low doses, it's still enough to help me retain some of that advantage that I had. So I don't feel it'd be right for me to compete still doing that. But also, like I said, I don't want to do anything that I think could harm the trans community and other trans athletes. And I just think I would be an easy target. And you throw my picture up, me looking all muscular, and it'd be real easy to see how that could be leveraged to help ban trans athletes from competing. So those are my concerns.
And that's understandable. And I think there's a whole other conversation right there with trans athletes as well. But
Mhm.
definitely to see where you're coming from and why you're making the choices you are. The documentary itself was taped, that was mostly like 2017, 2018, right? In there?
It was actually filmed from 2015 to 2017.
Oh, okay. So it's been a couple of years since the vast majority of that was taped. I am curious, how are things in your life since the documentary's changed? What personal gains have you had, or what's new with Janae?
Yeah, a lot actually. Of course, the boys are pretty much all grown up, which is crazy, and I'm kind of feeling that empty nest. I do have my middle son living with me right now. He's actually an iron worker, and my oldest son is a senior at the University of Michigan. He's in his major is biopsychology, cognition, and neuroscience, and it sounds really fancy, but it's basically like a pre-med type undergraduate degree. And then he's still trying to decide if he's going to go the PA route or go into med school or one of those paths. And then my youngest Max just graduated from high school, and he's going to start college in the fall, and he's looking at computer science probably as a major. And then for me, so if people saw the documentary, they realized like I lost my employment at the time, and it took me 11 months to get another job, but I did go back to working in pharmacy. I got a job in the hospital. I was there for a year and a half. And then this is something I had been considering and wanting to do for a long period of time, but didn't really have the financial means to do it. So when I worked at the hospital, I was saving the whole time and putting money away. And then in October of 2019, so last fall, I finally made the decision to leave pharmacy and focus on activism, speaking, and educating full time. And that's what I'm doing right now. I'm actually working on 2 books, and unfortunately, with COVID and everything that's going on, all the speaking appearances have been canceled. But hopefully, that'll get back to normal soon. And so it's really exciting for me. The trick, of course, is doing all these things and still keeping the lights on. And but it's awesome. I mean, for me, that's living the dream, right? You know, doing the things I'm passionate about, trying to help other people, and the trick is just being able to make a viable career out of it. But so far, you know, life is good, and I'm excited about everything, and I can't complain.
Awesome. I do want to allow you to talk about how people can get in touch with you as well. So, what's the best way for people to follow your story?
Okay, well, I'm on all the usual social media, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and it's Janae Marie Kroc on Instagram, also YouTube, Janae Marie Kroc on YouTube. Those are probably the two biggest channels that I'm putting the most energy into, but you also find me on Facebook under Janae Marie Kroc. And for those that aren't familiar, it's Kroc, Kroc. A lot of people assume CROC, like the crocodile, but it's actually the first four letters of my last name. So and then I have my website is janaekroc.com, and I'm starting to post more stuff in the blog, more articles, and there's more information on there. And you can reach me through my website. You can DM me through Instagram. Website's probably best, especially if it's anything professional, like as far as like speaking engagements, things like that. If you contact me through my website, I'll be much more likely to see it and get right back to you. Whereas with social media, it's kind of tough. There's a lot of messages, things, you know, get buried, and I try really hard to reply to everyone, but it's not always possible. But yeah, if people are looking to get in touch with me, janaekroc.com, and yeah, I appreciate everyone that you know, supports me and follows me.
All right. I've got one question left for you before we get over to our viewer questions. So, my final question for you is so many trans people struggle with feelings of fear and inadequacy for most of their lives, right? I know I spent the vast majority of my life in the closet. I didn't come out until I was 33 years old. What would you say to anyone out there who's afraid and not sure how to come to terms with who they are?
Well, I would say what you're feeling is totally normal, and all of us, almost all of us, go through it. I felt the same way. I was completely terrified, and I'm not going to lie, it's not always going to be easy. I mean, depending on the support system you have in place, it's going to be harder for some than others. But if there's one constant theme in my own life and every single trans person I've ever talked to, their only regret after coming out is that they didn't do it sooner. So I think that's a really common theme, and something, you know, like I honestly, I wish I would have come out sooner and, you know, got my life moving forward at an earlier date. So if it's something, you know, you're thinking about, you're hesitating on, and I know, I mean, it's terrifying. I thought I was going to lose everything. I thought I was going to lose all my friends. I thought my family would reject me. I thought like I would lose my lifting career and other things. And I'm not going to lie, there were hard things. I did lose some things. There were some people that left my life, and it wasn't easy, but it's absolutely worth it. There's no doubt whatsoever. I wouldn't change a thing. Like I said, the only thing would be to do it sooner, and just know there's a lot of support out there. Don't be afraid to reach out. And the other thing I'd like to emphasize too is that you never know how people are going to react. Everyone I've spoke to and in my own life, I was very surprised by people's reactions. Sometimes like, people you know really well, you think you know how they're going to react, and some of the people I thought would react very poorly actually were exactly the opposite. Were super supportive, and it brought people closer to me that I really wasn't close to before. And then some of the people that were close to me, I was shocked that they weren't supportive. So you can't really predict anybody's reactions, and the best thing is just to be open and honest, and you know, be proud of who you are. Don't be ashamed of it. And I said, it's not going to be easy, but it'll definitely be worth it. So if there's anything I could say, it would definitely be that.
I agree 100%. So we do have some viewer questions we want to get over to. If you're watching live right now on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitch, and you have any questions for Janae or myself, go ahead and put those in the chat. We'll try to get to as many as possible here. But first, I do want to start with questions that were submitted earlier in the week through Instagram. So our first question here is, what's the best equipment to start working out?
Working
Now keep in
out.
mind, we want to keep
Well, I
this
would.
answer to like under 20 minutes, okay, Janae?
Yes, I definitely could write a whole book about that for sure. It's going to depend on your goals, but I'm assuming that this person was referring to, you know, like weightlifting, since the question was directed towards me. Really, all you need to get started if you want some home equipment is a power rack, a bench, and a barbell. That will cover 90% of the exercises you need to do, and you can hit all the basics, hit all the important stuff, and train very, very well, and really do all the things you need to do with just, yeah, a power rack, a bench, and a barbell. Those are the three. You get those three things, you're off to a good start.
All right, our next question here, how do you get motivated to work out?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, the thing is, like with me and motivation, it was something I was always passionate about. So motivation really wasn't like a thing for me as far as like being motivated to achieve certain goals or be driven. I mean, from the time I was a young kid, around the same time I discovered my gendered feelings, I was also already, obsessed with like wanting to be big and muscular. So the motivation to achieve those goals has always been there. But like anyone else, there's days that I was exhausted. I was tired. I didn't feel like I'm like, oh my God, another huge squat workout or deadlifts today. I'm like, oh, it's the last thing I want to do. For me, I just always kept my goals in mind. And there were times it was very hard. Like in college, I was going to school full time. I was working. I was supporting a family with 3 children. And, I was in pharmacy school, which wasn't the easiest program. But I would go to school all day, work in the evening. I'd get home at like 11 midnight. I would actually, this is how obsessed I was. I would break into the gym. I'd break into the building where we had a small private weightlifting club that I was the president of. I would break into the building in the middle of the night, either pry open doors, climb through windows, whatever I had to do. I'd be down there at 1 o'clock in the morning, just exhausted. But then I would look at myself in the mirror and I'd have these little conversations and I would basically question my own resolve. And I would remind myself of all my goals and all the reasons I wanted to achieve the things I had achieved and how hard I'd worked already. So it was really just always staying focused on those goals and reminding myself why I was doing these things. And even like when before I broke the world record, the all-time world record, right before I pulled that final deadlift, that's what I went over in my head. Those 15 minutes before that last lift was all the work I'd put in, all the reasons I wanted to achieve those things, all the people who had doubted me and said it would never happen. I always kept those things in mind. And that was what drove me in training and drove me through all those years, all those hard training sessions. So those are the things I focus on. Those are the things that help me. And for someone else, it might be different, but focus on the reasons why you want to do it in the first place. If it makes you feel good, if there's certain goals you want to achieve, whatever that is, keep those things in mind. And those days, those hard days when you don't feel like doing it, when you're tired, when you're exhausted, remind yourself of all those important things. Write them down, post them on your refrigerator, put them next to the bench in your gym, wherever you're going to see them. But keep those things present, and that'll always really help with motivation.
And for the record, I'm over here writing stuff down right now because like this is really good information. Hold on a second. Um, let's go to our next question. No, that's a fantastic answer. That was fantastic. Our next question, is it difficult maintaining your diet with HRT?
It's definitely changed a few things. I've noticed differences in my appetite, estrogen. It definitely it promotes more body fat gain and promotes muscle loss. So it's definitely made it more difficult, and especially for me too. Like unfortunately, like all of us are different. Some people respond to HRT amazingly; their bodies change exactly how they want to. For me, I wasn't as lucky, and a lot of that probably had to do with me, transitioning a little later in life. And but some girls, have great success. But for me, I didn't get much breast development that I was hoping. I didn't get the curves I was hoping for. And I did start gaining a lot more fat, and unfortunately, it was going to my stomach. And that was something that actually made me feel less feminine because I felt it was like, ruining the smaller waist that I had. And but yeah, it's been more challenging. I would say that I've noticed some different cravings and things like that. But all in all, it still kind of comes back to discipline and for me, being a lifelong athlete and a bodybuilder, someone who dieted strictly for 4 and 5 months at a time for shows. It was something that I was very well trained at. But yeah, it definitely doesn't make it easy, and and sometimes when you see your gains disappearing, it would get frustrating at times. But then like I said, again, I had to keep the end goal in mind, and stay on track, and realize sometimes it's going to be a bit more challenging.
All right. Our next question from our viewers. Did your cancer diagnosis change your timeline on when you decided to come out? And I know we didn't really talk about this in the interview here.
Yeah. Yeah, so I can, for people that haven't heard about that or know that part of my story, I was actually diagnosed with testicular cancer. And it, you know, it, it definitely made me think about some things. I was still too terrified to come out at that point. But this will sound crazy to people that aren't trans or can't relate to these type of feelings. But when I was diagnosed with testicular cancer, I was actually like part of me was actually happy. I knew they'd have to remove at least one of my testicles, and I actually was hoping that the cancer would spread and they'd have to remove everything. And then in my head, I was thinking, and even though I was a pharmacist, I had medical training, I knew that the cancer didn't spread that way. If it did spread, it would spread into your lymph glands and then throughout your body. But there was a small part of me, it was like, gosh, I just hope they have to remove everything. And then then I can say, oh, it wasn't my fault. And this is now I have to have, gender confirmation surgery. And so it was like this, but really what was going on, it was wanting that so bad, but not being ready to claim it yet, not being ready to own it. And but it did stir up a lot of emotions. And I was still completely closeted at that time when that happened. And, and it was just like, oh my gosh, yeah, it definitely, like I said, just, think about that. The fact that you would actually want your cancer to spread, that tells
That
you like
is
how powerful
definitely
those
like
feelings were.
that's a hashtag just trans things type moment right there.
Yes.
Right? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah. It's just, yeah. Cause like I was still, like I said, I was still too ashamed to admit, who I really was. But I still wanted that, deep down, I still wanted that same result and I knew where I needed to go. So unfortunately, it didn't change the timeline in the end, but it definitely made me think about things even more than I already was,
Yeah.
which was hard to believe because I thought about it constantly. But, and I was lucky with the cancer. I mean, I had surgery and radiation. I went through 20 sessions of radiation. Unfortunately, I tolerated it all really well. And I had just gone into it with the attitude too that I never saw it as the end. I never really was afraid of dying. And I think maybe if I had thought about that more or really weighed that option more seriously, it might have made it more urgent. And I definitely think that could have been like, you know what, it's now or never, and I need to do it. But for whatever reason, my mindset going into it was always that, well, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to beat this. I'm going to be okay. And so I never really entertained that idea that I wasn't going to make it. And fortunately, I was lucky, and like I said, things went well, and I tolerated the therapies well. It was still a really a tough experience and really crazy at times. And there's things you deal with that you wouldn't expect. And for me, there was like what some people refer to as survivor's guilt. Like I felt going through the radiation sessions, I still looked very healthy. And, I was lifting and competing, and I had some nausea and I was more tired, but for the most part, I still looked and felt very healthy. And I'm going in there and there's people that are, they're just really suffering. And I felt guilty because of that. Like, I felt like this isn't fair. Why is it so hard for them? And it's so much easier for me. And so there were a lot of complicated emotions with that.
Definitely. All right, our next question from our viewers. What's the most difficult encounter you've had in public presenting as yourself? I think you touched on this a little bit during the interview
Yeah.
already.
Yeah, so there was one incident. I was leaving a club in Ann Arbor, and for those that aren't of you that are familiar with the Midwest or Ann Arbor in general, Ann Arbor is a very LGBTQIA plus friendly community, especially for the Midwest. And so I had never had something like this happen, and it really caught me off guard. I realized after this incident that I needed to be much more aware of my surroundings. And for the first time in my life, I realized that I was now a target too. Having been socialized as a male, and especially a big muscular male, and having been a former Marine and all these things, I was never someone that was seen as a target. And but anyway, that night I was out alone, and usually I went out with a group of friends, but for whatever reason, no one else could go that night. When I was leaving after the club closed, I was going back, walking through this parking garage, and it was in the summertime. I was wearing this cute little spaghetti strap dress, and and I never had any idea these people were even there. I got to my car and got in. And for those of you that are wondering, no, I wasn't drinking that night, so I wasn't drinking and driving. And but as soon as I got into my car and shut the door, there was a guy standing right outside my window with his face right against my window, basically mean mugging me. And growing up the way I did and stuff, I recognized the way people act and the way they carry themselves when they want to fight or they're looking for trouble. And that's definitely how these people were acting. And right behind him, there were 4 other guys. So there were 5 of them total. They basically had surrounded like one side of my car. And I just very quickly, as soon as I shut the door, I nonchalantly locked everything really quickly, started my car fast. I think the only thing that made them hesitate was my size. I think when they got close to me and I was still very muscular, and like I said, I was wearing a spaghetti strap dress where my arms and shoulders were showing. And they definitely, there's no doubt in my mind, they had very bad intentions. And, like I said, the looks on their faces, the fact that the scary part was I had no idea they were there. And they were literally like right behind me. So if they had wanted to club me in the back of the head with something, I would have not seen it coming. Like I had no idea. And fortunately, I was able to pull away quickly, and they didn't end up doing anything. But it was a moment that could have turned very ugly, and definitely changed how I viewed myself, and made me aware of the possibilities that are out there, and the need to be aware of my surroundings and be conscious of those types of things.
I think that's something that a lot of us trans feminine individuals have to learn. It's something we never had to worry about before in our lives. And I know I've had to learn it. And, as that male privilege disappears, you become much more aware of the people around you. But, having an incident like that, that's a rude awakening of just how dangerous it can be out there for somebody who's
Yeah.
visibly transgender.
Yeah, and like I said, we are frequently, victims of attacks and violence and things like that. And when you said, for people that are socialized as a male, we're not taught these things like most young women are taught, to be conscious of your surroundings, and to, be aware of what's going on. And I had never been taught those things, and never even thought about them. And yeah, that privilege, really, that incident really opened my eyes, and realizing, wow, I'm a target now too. And even though I was, still fairly, big and muscular, it's just something I needed to be conscious of. And yeah, that easily could have turned out very poorly.
Hmm. Wow. All right. I know we're running a little bit long. I hope you're okay to answer a few more questions because we still have some good ones at the
Yep,
end.
no, I'm happy as long as we need.
Okay. Next question was, what options are there for trans bodybuilders?
That's a good question. Right now, and I've actually had people reach out to me that are trying to compete in different organizations and ask me about the rules. So in powerlifting, there's a couple small organizations that have allowed transgender powerlifters to compete in them. But most of then there's one organization at least that I know of that has banned. So anyone who's familiar with powerlifting, the USAPL, they are very anti-trans. They are not trans friendly at all. They've made this very public. And there was a young woman, JC Cooper, who was registered to compete in one of their competitions. About, gosh, it's been a year or two now. And they were very adamant. They did not allow her to compete, and they were very adamant about banning all trans athletes, and have been very firm in that stance, even when called out on it. So anyone who's thinking about powerlifting, USAPL, just steer clear of them. They are not trans friendly at all.
Mm.
Most of the organizations really haven't addressed it at this point. A lot of them are still thinking about how to handle this, but if you're interested in competing, look up the organizations in your area, contact the state chair or whoever, and then start there. And you can reach out to me, and if I may know people wherever you live, especially if you're in the United States, and I might be able to point you at organizations that are more friendly, or at least people to talk to. Um, there is a small organization that's trying to gain traction that just reached out to me, that is hosting trans specific competitions. I'll be posting more about that as things develop in the future on my social media and on my website. But for now with powerlifting, it's still, like I said, everybody's still kind of trying to sort all that out. And I'm obviously plan on being a voice to help support trans athletes and explain to everyone the science behind everything. I've actually written an article. I'm going to be doing a YouTube video about all of that and addressing this issue. It's something I've researched very extensively, and I think I'm very educated on the subject, and can help share a lot of good information, and I'll be doing that soon. I had actually planned to start talking about all that right before this year's Olympics, because I knew it was going to be a hot topic, because it was the first time there was likely going to be an out trans athlete competing in the Olympics. But now that everything's been postponed, I was kind of, I kind of wanted to wait and address that when all that was coming up, because I knew it was going to be a really important topic. And as far as bodybuilding, it's kind of the same thing. There's a lot of organizations haven't, especially the biggest organizations, they just haven't really addressed it. I do know of some trans women that have competed, and it was I wouldn't say it was totally stealth. Some people knew they were trans, but they weren't completely out about it. I know some other athletes that have reached out to, like, the NPC, who is one of the major governing bodies for amateur bodybuilding, and they also, fitness and figure competitions, physique, and all the different categories. And they have not received a reply. They said, look, here's my status, and I want to compete, and I'm very open about being trans. And they haven't got a yes or a no at this point. They're still waiting to hear back. So yeah, again, like, you can reach out to me, reach out to the organizations you're interested in, but I think it's something that a lot of the organizations are still trying to figure out how they're going to handle this.
Got it. Okay, there was just a few more questions I wanted to get to from the live chats here. So let's throw those up really quick. Is there any one part of your routine that makes you feel particularly feminine?
Well, I've learned, I think what's important for me is that I've learned to realize that strength and muscularity can be feminine. And, whatever any woman does is feminine. It's not that anything, we need to, people might think, well, maybe if there's a part of your, like if I was still competing in bodybuilding and I was doing a part of my routine that was more artistic, someone may say, well, gosh, doesn't that make you feel more feminine? Well, I think I can be just as feminine lifting 600 pounds or whatever it is. It's not really, I really like to emphasize that I don't think it's a correct way to look at things to emphasize a sport or an endeavor or certain aspects of it as masculine or feminine, because you can name anything you want that is stereotypically masculine, whether you want to talk about, things like being in the military, powerlifting, anything that's considered stereotypically masculine. And I will show you women that love doing it. The same thing, like I'm into muscle cars and I like building engines and racing my cars. There's amazing women race car drivers out there. There's amazing women mechanics. There's amazing women athletes. So no matter what the endeavor is or what the pursuit is, there are women that love it. There are men that love it. And I think looking at things as being gendered or being more masculine or being more feminine, I think is an incorrect way to look at it. And there's things like, in the opposite end of the spectrum, things like ballet or makeup artists or things like that, they're considered more traditionally feminine. I think that's baloney too. There are men that love doing those things and are very proficient at it. I mean, look at all the amazing male makeup artists out there. I mean, Kevin Aucoin was kind of a personal hero of mine. And, so I think that, looking at endeavors or certain aspects as masculine or feminine, I think it's just looking at them as being part of the human experience. And people like all different things. We're all incredibly complex. And I think that, trying to define something as more masculine or more feminine is just really not the most accurate way to look at things.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a great answer. The next question we had here, something else that was talked about in the documentary. I'm not sure if this is too personal, but your parents and your parents' reaction was talked about quite a bit in the documentary.
Yeah, so for those of you who saw the documentary, my parents did not have the most positive reaction, and I was kind of expecting that. And actually, for those of you who have seen the documentary or are going to see it, there's a scene with my mom. That is actually the first time she ever spoke to me about it. I had come out to her a decade before that, 10 years before we shot that scene. And anybody's wondering too about the documentary, it's 100% real. Nothing was scripted. Nothing was staged. They basically just followed me around for a 2-year period and, filmed what was going on. And so what you see is all real, all raw. And that was the first time my mom ever spoke about me being trans. I tried for 10 years to have conversations with her about it, and she would just immediately change the subject or just not talk about it and just avoid it. And so when we came in there and it took a little convincing. The director actually had to talk to her to get her to even allow them to film and for us to come in there. And but that was her real reaction. And basically what she said is that she felt like her son had died, and that was very tough for me to hear. And since that time, she's gotten better, and she now uses my name, Janae, and we've talked about a lot of things. She's definitely getting there. It's still difficult for her, and she definitely made some progress. And there are at times, it was kind of difficult for me because I'd given her so much time and really tried to be understanding. And the fact that she wasn't, I understood that she didn't understand, but I felt like she wasn't making any effort, and that was tough for me. And then as far as my dad's concerned, he's definitely. So last year for Christmas, I had a big Christmas dinner at my house, and I was presenting just like I am now. And I wore a long dress and everything. And when he got there, he didn't realize, I guess, that I was going to be presenting that way. And my boys actually had to go outside and convince him to come in, and he did. But he came in, had dinner, and everything was fine. And so he's come a little way. He still definitely has a very hard time with it. So I mean, they both made progress. I won't say it's in a place that is perfect by any means, and they definitely both still struggle with it. But my mom is starting to really come around, and my dad's made some progress, but it's still tough. And I just try to keep in mind. I try to remind myself, the way they were raised, where they come from, and the values they were taught, and be as understanding as I can at the same time while trying to encourage them to understand and, just talk with me about it and to be more understanding and more open. But still progress to be made, but definitely moving in the right direction.
That's what I'd like to hear. Something that I try to keep in mind with my parents, or I tried to keep in mind with my parents earlier on is, as long as there's progress, right? As long as there's forward progress and they're working towards it, I can work with that. I can work with somebody who's working with me, right? So that's good news. And I'm glad to hear that they're still moving forward with you.
Well, thank you.
All right, we've got one more question for you, and then we'll let you go. I know we ran a little long here tonight. After a long struggle with gender, was there a specific moment when you knew you needed to transition?
Oh gosh. Deep down, I probably knew it from 5 or 6 years old. I mean, there were so many. It's funny, and I'm guessing you can probably relate. But for trans people, it's like we do a really good job of fooling ourselves, and then looking back, it's like there were so many clear signs from such a young, early age. But I think there was one moment when I finally accepted that I was trans, and I was reading a book by a woman named Donna Rose, and the book was titled Wrapped in Blue, and she was the first trans woman I read about that wasn't like stereotypically feminine. She was a college wrestler in Canada, and at one point in the book, she was talking about how she was working out with weights and getting really muscular, and her dad actually asked her if she was taking steroids. And then it just like a light bulb went off in my head. Here was this muscular wrestler, which I wrestled for a really long time. I wrestled from middle school all the way through the Marine Corps and afterwards. And so it was something I could totally relate to. But I just remember that moment, like talking about like the lifting and the wrestling, and it was like a light bulb went off in my head. And I think I said out loud, I was like, oh crap. And I was like, I am trans. And it was just like, at that moment, I could no longer deny it. So that was like that light bulb moment that was just like, oh boy, now I got to deal with this. Because at that, I'm still
I
at
love
that
that.
up
I
to
love
that
that
point.
it's Donna Rose that kind of broke your egg there, right? Donna was one of the very first people I found online, like early on,
Oh,
who was putting her story together and was putting information out there and was actually, a person versus the way that a lot of trans individuals are represented. She was always so open and willing to share her story, a huge resource for me. And it's awesome to hear that it was that way for you as well. So that's cool.
yeah, yeah. It was definitely her story that, like I said, just kind of, I was past the point of being able to deny it any longer, and then really had to start, dealing with it and moving forward. But definitely a light bulb moment for me, and I was, so thankful that she wrote that book and shared her story.
Very, very cool. All right, that wraps up our questions. The questions are done. So hang tight for just a moment, Janae. I want to talk really
Mhm.
quickly about next week's episode. So we will be back live next Thursday, and our guests are going to be a couple, Taylor and Sarah. They've been documenting Taylor's transition and the evolution of their marriage on YouTube and Instagram under the channel Happily Ever Trans. I'll be talking with them about the ups and downs of transitioning in a relationship and the impact of transition on their marriage, family, and friends. So I hope that many of you will join us to get back here again next week, same time, same place, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern on July 16th. And we'll be live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. And I think Happily Ever Trans is actually watching us live on YouTube right now. So that's kind of fun. As always, if you're not currently following us, if you'd like to get notifications when we go live, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Trans IRL. Our past episodes are up there. And on Facebook, we are Trans IRL Show. And Instagram, we are Trans IRL. Don't forget to follow and like us there. And as a reminder, if you do want to submit questions before showtime, you can do that through our Instagram page. And Twitch, we're streaming there at Trans IRL as well. All right, that's my pitch for our show. Let's bring everyone back on here. Stephen, thank you for running everything so smoothly in the background there. And Janae, thank you so much for your time here this evening. You are beautiful inside and out. I just love your story, appreciate everything that you shared with us here tonight, and just am so honored to have you on. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate you allowing me an opportunity to share my story with all of your listeners.
All right, everyone. From all of us here at Trans IRL, we appreciate you tuning in here tonight. Hope you join us again next week. Have a great night, everyone. Bye.